every season, we like to just sort of mentally review the season and see how it went. It's good to go over the failures, the successes, get a game plan for the next year. This year, it started with a bang in March. Usually about the first thing that we do in the garden is to trim the roses. And I still just vividly remember we were trimming the roses and the world was shutting down, everything was going into lockdown, and just thinking, is it even worth it to plant flowers? Who's gonna want flowers? You know, is the world gonna be standing in a few months? Seems so dramatic now.
Yeah, what stands out in my mind at the beginning of the year was the snow we had in May. We don't typically have snow in May. Usually our last frost is somewhere in April. It can be the 1st of May, but usually not too much later than that. But I think it was the 11th or the
13th was our last frost.
Yeah. Right. It was quite the start to a year in many ways.
It was a really short growing season this year. Rosita said yesterday, and I hadn't even thought of it this way, but we had 3 frost-free months, and typically we can get 5, 6 in a season, with the late frost in May, and then we had frost in September as well. It was about 4 months between frosts, but
so June, July, and August would all have been frost-free, but May and September both had frost.
And by frost-free, we mean super hot, like 90s. Hundreds.
That was the that was the other thing.
Yeah, it was a year of extremes, from really cold to really hot.
So middle of May the beginning of May we had snow. The middle of May was our last frost, and by the middle of June I think we had hit 90.
Consistently though for about 10 days we had temperatures in the 90s.
Right. I think it was maybe between June and July. I should look at my records or see what we have,
but all those complaining sounds, just to let you know, it was kind of a tough growing season for us here. But there were obvious successes, things that really went well for us, and then we'll also recount the failures together here.
So if you did have a rough growing year and you're in the Midwest, especially like say dahlias, which did very poorly for us this year, don't gauge it on how this year went, because this year wasn't a fair trial for dahlias, I don't think. I was talking to a neighbor the other day, and he said that he's ready just to give up on dahlias. And I said, well, if this was your gauging point, don't count 2020.
Don't go by 2020.
Try again next year.
Right. It's probably good to take an average of about 5 years, and if it hasn't gone well for 5 years, then you may give it up.
Right.
You want. So one of the things that I liked about the season, right off the bat, we checked off something on our list. It's been on our list for a while, and that was building a little sapling arch at the head of our garden. It's not going to win any awards anytime soon, but the front of the garden really needed something to sort of distinguish it, I think. Right. And we didn't want to do anything too permanent, because what if we want to move it, whatever. So it gave us a real good idea of what we'd want to do down the road, I think. And we're talking about adding a few more on the sides as well. So
it was fun. We had an inspiration picture, and I think it's a picture I've had sort of on a Pinterest board for maybe 4 or 5 years.
Right.
And it sort of turned out like it, sort of not. It was a fun experiment.
Yeah.
So another unexpected boon was really healthy zinnias this year, because they like it hot and they can take the dry. I think our zinnias got established just before it got really hot and dry, and so they were fine. And the first planting I'm going to say 3 or 4 weeks ago, finally started showing signs of mildew. Usually they show signs early, like maybe in August already. And we try to do succession plantings so that once one batch goes bad, we can rip it out and depend on the second sowing or third. But we really haven't needed we did use our second sowing some, but we didn't even do a third sowing then.
We did, but it's just 2 feet high.
Oh, you're right.
Yeah.
Yes, we did.
Haven't used it yet. Haven't needed it.
Right.
So it was a good year for zinnias. It was also a good year for roses. Cue that George Jones song. What a good year for the roses. It's probably because they're 3 years established now, something like that. And so they didn't mind the drought. They also did really well. They didn't develop mildew either. They were just prolific. They bloomed and bloomed. Usually they go in flushes, but we were never without roses this year. And we don't use them really heavily in bouquets. It's just they're kind of for our enjoyment, but we really enjoyed them this year.
So another bonus for having hot, dry weather was very little weed pressure. I think our garden probably looked the best this year that it's maybe ever looked. I think someone even commented on it.
We kind of forgot to weed, and we're startled to find 5-foot tall weeds.
Oh, right.
They sort of hide in with the plants, like the roses had a 5-foot weed in them.
But as a whole, like if you have a lot of moisture right when everything's growing, then the weeds also just go crazy. And I think we didn't have too much right then, plus we kind of stayed on top of it. And I just feel like the garden was had a lot less weeds this year. That may some be in part due to the no dig that we like to do as well, where you just pile on top and aren't turning new weed seeds up to the light.
We also grew a few fun new varieties. My favorite was Argentinian forget-me-not. I can't say the Latin name. We couldn't find seeds. We'd seen pictures, couldn't find seeds here in the States, so we ordered them in from England, and they were as billed. They were lovely. I really liked them. So that's definitely a must grow for next year as well.
One of the bad things about the snow that we had in May, I think it froze out the main bud on all of the first bud on all of the peonies that we have. And we have 100 some? And we're banking heavily on those to do bouquets, I think maybe in May and June. And they were toast. Which thankfully I don't think the side buds were as far along, and so we did have a later flush then of
about 2 weeks later than what we typically have.
Right.
They were smaller, side buds aren't usually as big as the main bud, but we still got some peonies then. But it was maybe half of what we usually do.
Probably.
Yeah. Our tulips did not do well this year either, and we had tried an experiment last year. I've often thought, why can't we just leave our tulip bulbs in the ground, like home gardeners do? If you grow them to sell, flower farmers will usually pull the bulb out with the tulip and then discard the bulb. You get longer stem length that way.
Plus you can store them dry.
Right, you can store them in your cooler dry for I think up to a month. So it usually just works better, but then you're buying tulips every year. So we thought you have to leave at least two leaves on the bulb or on the stalk to get food for the next year. And I think we did that. Most of them had food, but I don't know. It was a very pathetic showing of tulips. Plus I think maybe they got a little diseased, or I'm not sure. We decided, okay, we're always just going to buy new bulbs. And our tulip bulbs are sitting right over there, ready to go in the ground. I think you can leave them in, but not if you're depending on them for cut flowers.
One thing that did surprisingly well for us this year was our ranunculus. I was very surprised because last year we did an experiment, total bust. And the year before that, I think we did have some.
Yeah, they were decent.
So this is just our third year growing them. And typically you have to have a frost-free area for them to grow, where they like it 40 to 50 degrees for a long time. And I think from when you plant to when they actually bloom, it's about 90 days, something like that. Well, our spring goes by so fast. There's no 90 days where it's 40 and 50 degrees. So we use a low tunnel, and it was just really fun. We had beautiful colors. And I feel like they did really well.
They produced a lot.
Right.
Yeah.
I feel like they did shut down sooner though, because we had that hot weather in June. I think they probably would have gone through the end of June if it wouldn't have been so hot. But they bloomed and bloomed. I loved the kinds that we had. Amandine, I think maybe was the kind we tried last year that did well.
Right. So another challenge this spring was, we told you about the cold and then the hot. Well, what happened, after the cold, we had about 10 days of rain. It might not have rained every day, but the ground was really saturated, so we weren't able to plant much. So it went from cold to rainy to really hot. And you had to be a miracle worker to get the dahlias in the ground. And so then we had started most of our dahlias in pots, so they were established. But the heat of June just really stunted them. Right. So I think one of the big disappointments of the year would have been the dahlias. Now, this can be deceiving, but this is October 3rd, and this is the first real
cutting like this that we've been able to make.
Which we've been using dahlias in bouquets, so we haven't been,
But probably not half this value.
Yeah,
we've got a couple more vases sitting around here too. Not all of the dahlias are back there, but
yeah, it's been a challenging year for dahlias. And we were like, is it something we've done? We didn't put irrigation in, for one. Last year we put it in. It's a lot of work to lay irrigation, and I think we used it twice, maybe. Didn't need it. So this year we said, okay, we're just not going to put it in.
Well, part of that was too because it was so wet in the spring. We're like, well, it's probably going to be one of those wet years. Well, you can never predict that.
Right.
Foolish to try.
So if you want a dry summer, don't put irrigation in. No. But so we thought, okay, it probably was some that they didn't get enough moisture either. We made a few mistakes with our mulching, I think. We have a wood shop here on the property, so we get a lot of shavings or sawdust from that. And typically we like to let it compost for a year or two, usually 2 years, so it's not as acidic. But I think we used some fairly fresh stuff. It maybe had been sitting about a year. So that what that does is it leaches nitrogen from the soil. And I don't know if that affected the plant growth. I don't know. We don't quite know what all went wrong. But it was a little bit comforting because misery loves company. And we're part of some flower farmer groups on Facebook, etc. And I think a lot of people in our zone had a really tough dahlia year.
There were many dahlia moans.
Yes, there were. Moans and groans. Misshapen dahlias. So what happens then is if your plants aren't growing well, you get these short, really fat stalks. The stem length just isn't there. A lot of that.
Right, and you mentioned misshapen blooms or even like mutations, and I actually looked it up because I was concerned, do we have disease stock or what is going on here? And dahlias, I guess, can mutate really quickly. And
if they're stressed.
Right, if they're stressed, they will show, like they may revert to a color from a parent or a characteristic or something, or have misshapen blooms, things like that.
We're talking about getting new stock of some of them because like if they get stressed, they'll never go back to the way that they were.
We don't think.
Well, yeah, right.
We're no experts here.
Well, isn't that what you found?
Well, that's what it said.
That's what you found. Okay.
I always like to test things out a while though, first before I say it as gospel.
Take it all with a grain of salt, everything we say.
Another sad casualty of this year was our foxgloves that we planted last year. Foxgloves, most of them are biennials and will only bloom every other, like you plant them one year and they bloom the next. Some will, if you plant them soon enough, they will actually produce some blooms that year. But we planted ours last year and covered them with a thick layer of compost. Right.
Remove the leaves.
Covered them with a thick layer of compost and killed them. Like, I think that's what happened. I don't know. Murdered our darlings.
We sure did.
So that was a learning curve. I think they say to mulch them maybe with straw or something that doesn't hold moisture in, because I think too much moisture there at the roots can actually rot them out. So we planted 200. I think we had planted 100 last year. We maybe doubled it this year. You know, if you have a multitude, maybe a few will survive. But we are planning to cut them down after frost, like after they freeze out. I'm going to say probably November, December, because it takes a little while for the leaves to die, and then put straw on it this year to see if we can save them.
Right. Oh, this. You can be the best gardener in the world, but if you plant the wrong seeds. We did that with our zinnias. I think, I'm not sure if we miscommunicated or if we just didn't, I'm not sure what happened. I think we got bad seed, but don't want to throw anybody under the bus.
I think the pictures were deceiving on the website.
Maybe.
Because we've never grown this actual variety.
Okay. It was just this bright candy pink. Nothing wrong with the color, but nothing much that we planted went with it. It didn't go with our color scheme.
We occasionally bent our color scheme.
With disastrous results.
It wasn't great.
We've also learned that beauty is in the eye of the beholder, and something that we might not think is so pretty just might fly off the shelves when we sell them. So I don't know. But I think next year I'd want to plant more zinnias, more varieties, so we have a few more options.
One thing we learned this year, if you're going to grow good Lizzie or Lysianthus, you want to stake them very soon after you actually plant them. Because if you don't, they will flop and then they'll grow curved. And it's really hard to use a flower that has a 90-degree angle in it, you know, it just doesn't work.
You know, we knew all this, but we just didn't have time. It was
one of the casualties of a very busy spring.
Right.
Because like you said, we had rain and we had to get everything in as soon as possible. And the thing was get everything in the ground and then catch up. Well, the catch up never happened.
Right.
Stuff started blooming and it was wild.
So, and I think probably half of our Lysianthus died. And part of that was because we let the weeds grow really tall on them. We didn't get them mulched in time. So when we weeded them, we uprooted them a little bit. So some of them died because of that. And then when we went to put the netting on, we had to sort of bend them and weave them up through it, and
Probably again wiggled the roots too much.
I think some of them died because of that. The flowers that I think you have to stake are all the flowers. No, not quite, but Lysianthus, Dahlias, Zinnias, those tend to flop pretty bad for us.
Bachelor buttons,
Bachelor buttons.
sunflowers.
Yeah, sunflowers. There's a jungle of gnarly sunflowers out there. If you have a sheltered and protected place, you might be fine, but Lysianthus is something that grows in a long, skinny stalk, and it needs support, I think.
A lot of people will plant it in plastic and like just have small holes, plant it right there, or like landscape fabric or something. And then you have to just go through and make sure you keep it weeded until it's big. The thing with Lysianthus is that it stays small so long. It like grows for months and months, and then all of a sudden there's a flower.
Yeah.
So it gives the weeds a good chance it's a bed that can get really weedy really fast, put it that way.
So plant, mulch, stake in that order. Should we talk about our plan for next year or not really?
Sure.
So what's clear in our minds for next year is, well, number one, our plan for the year has sort of changed.
Right.
Pretty much. We have a number of things going on outside of, our side hustle and our job. It's a busy year otherwise, so we're thinking about just taking a break from events, all events,
Weddings, sip and snips.
Yeah, garden events.
Workshops.
We'll see if we hold to that, but at this point, that's our plan. And we plan to produce a lot more online content that way. There's stuff that we've been wanting to do ever since we started, and we just haven't had the time. So we thought we need to just block off time for that.
We'd like to get a little more creative with our flowers and actually be able to use our own flowers and do things with them. I think that's the thing I missed the most this summer. This year, for the first time, we took bouquets to a local store here and sold them once a week, I think. And that was good. It was a good discipline to get up early on a Thursday morning, make our bouquets Thursday evening, and take them in, on Friday for the weekend. That I enjoyed that. And we'll probably still do that.
Yeah, I think we will.
But what I missed, we often had events on the weekends then, workshops or sip and snips or something, weddings. And so it felt like we were just saving flowers, always, forever, perennially saving the flowers for the next event.
We muzzled the oxen this year.
Right. And I'm done with that. It's okay to do that, I guess. Yeah. And we needed to. We didn't have quite as many flowers as what we had hoped for. We planted more dahlias than we ever have. And I think
we got fewer dahlias than we ever have.
Right.
One thing about our garden plan that's changing is, so it's a little unusual to know exactly what we're planning to do next year. I always think that you have to decide if you're going to do weddings or market bouquets, because I think you should probably use different types of flowers for those. For instance, for market bouquets, you want bright, showy, colorful. It doesn't all have to be, but that's what catches people's eyes, and that's what you're going to sell more of. So if we're not doing weddings, maybe gear our flowers toward that a little more. And we had talked about putting up a greenhouse this fall. Just didn't feel like biting off that yet. So to take some of the stress off of her, she usually has to start everything in her apartment, and it just gets overrun with all the things.
It looks like a greenhouse.
It does, pretty much. So the thought there is to direct sow a lot more, figure out what we can winter sow and sow cold hardy annuals, but then also buy in just plugs that we can just pop in the ground. Kind of like a vacation next year, only it's not a vacation. Still going to be doing all the things. But I am very excited about it.
Right. And I love garden work, and I think you do too.
Yeah,
I love weeding. I love tending a garden, but I don't like to be too busy that I can't enjoy the garden itself, I guess, and the flowers.
Right. Sometimes, because I think sometimes people get into this because they love flowers or they have this romantic notion, and what happens is flower farming is just not really romantic. It's hard work. It's a lot of hard work.
It's dirt and sweat, and
you chase the dream and the dream ends up chasing you, I think. And so
for sure,
sometimes you just have to step out of line and let it go by and get back to what's fun about it.
Right.
This has to work for us. We're not going to do this if we don't enjoy it.
And we're willing to work hard. Like, we're not, I'll say it for us, we're not lazy.
No, we're not.
We're not sitting around doing nothing.
Not in the summer. In the winter we do.
Okay, yeah. But I do think you need to take time to enjoy life too.
Right.
And we haven't had a lot of margin this summer to do that.
Margin. 2021 is about margin, not margarine. Okay, so that's the recap of the year and a little bit of what we're planning for next year. Anything more to say?
I do not.
All right, thanks for sticking with us this long.